there, but I'll reply to all your comments and everything after this little show. So, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is my first broadcast on Bilete Bangali, although I've been watching all of your broadcasts and enjoying them. Now it's my turn to do something, bring something to the table. I'm Shudokina Bhattacharya. অনেকে আপনারা চেনেন আমাকে as part of the Biba admin and moderator team. Hello everyone from me and a little guest of mine as well. I brought a furry friend, Sweep. You know, and he says hello too. So, hello Shonali, hello Mandy, hello Panchada. Thank you all for coming. Hi Mohua, hello. Sweep hello bolche. Back kore dekho. He also says hello. So, hello everyone. So, so let's start a session. So I'm part of the Biba admin and moderator team. And by profession, I'm a journalist, a textbook author. I'm নিজেও একটা বই লিখেছি, পড়াশোনার বই যদিও। And আমি currently got অনেক 6-7 বছর ধরে digital content marketing করি as a profession. আমি প্রোগ্রামের শেষে আমি website details দেব for those of you who are interested in my work and things who want to know a bit more. But এখন আর না, বড়দের গল্প না, এখন ছোটদের জন্য time. Hi Anya, hello. And any other children who are present, hello everyone. And for me and Sweep. Okay, so today it's about storytelling. I mean, নিজে এমনি ছোটবেলায় খুবই বই পোকা ছিলাম. I was a big bookworm, and Roald Dahl was one of my favourite authors, as I'm sure is so many of yours as well. So, Magic Finger is a favourite story of mine, and I'm sure it is. A lot of you might have read it. The mummies and daddies in the group might have read it already. Some of you, the kids, have read it. Some of you may not have read it. So, whichever way it is, let's start. And Sweep will sometimes help me as well in telling the story. Well, you'll try to anyway. You'll be a good boy. Yes, he says yes. Okay, right. Let's start then, shall we? So, the Magic Finger. So there are 4 main characters in this book. I hope you can see it. I'm not sure of the quality, but I hope you can see the picture clearly. And this book has pictures. So there's the girl, who's the narrator and the main protagonist, the main character. Then there are 2 boys, Philip Gregg and Will Gregg. And then there are Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. So the story is about the Gregg family, essentially, and the girl with the magic finger. So let's start. Sweepers are getting excited. So let's start. Let's give it a go. Right. So, okay. Here we go, we're starting here. The farm next to ours is owned by Mr. and Mrs. Gregg. The Greggs have 2 children, both of them boys. Their names are Philip and William. Sometimes I go over to their farm to play with them. I'm a girl and I'm 8 years old. Amina, the girl there, you know. Philip is also 8 years old. William is 3 years old. He is 10. What? Oh, all right then. He is 11. Little math lesson there. If Philip is 8, I am 8, William is 11, then how can William be 10 if he's 3 years older? Last week, something very funny happened to the Gregg family, and I'm going to tell you about it as best as I can. Okay. Now, the one thing that Mr. Gregg and his 2 boys loved to do more than anything else was to go hunting. Every Saturday morning, they would take their guns and go off into the woods to look for animals and birds to shoot. Even Philip, who was only 8 years old, had a gun of his own. I can't stand hunting. I just can't stand it. It doesn't seem right to me that men and boys should kill animals just for the fun they get out of it. So I used to try to stop Philip and William from doing it. Every time I went over to their farm, I would do my best to talk them out of it. But they only laughed at me. Which does beg a question. Is hunting a good thing? What do you think? You can leave your comments below in the discussion. We can have a debate later on about it. It does beg a question. I even said something about it once to Mr. Gregg, but he just walked on past me as if I wasn't there. Then one Saturday morning, I saw Philip, William coming out of the woods with their father, and they were carrying a lovely young deer. This made me so cross that I started shouting at them. And you can see here in the pictures, there's the Gregg family carrying the deer along. Not a nice scene. The boys laughed and made faces at me. Mr. Gregg told me to go home and mind my own P's and Q's, which means mind your own business. But that did it. I saw red. And before I was able to stop myself, I did something I never meant to do. I put the magic finger on them all. Here you go, you can see. There she does with the magic finger. She puts it on them all. Oh dear, oh dear. I even put it on Mrs. Gregg, who wasn't there. I put it on the whole Gregg family. For months, I've been telling myself that I would never put the magic finger upon anyone. Again, not after what happened to my teacher, old Mrs. Winter. Poor old Mrs. Winter. One day we were in class and she was teaching us spelling. Stand up, she said to me, and spell cat. That's an easy one, I said. K-A-T. Is that the right spelling, Sweep? No, it isn't. You are a stupid little girl, Mrs. Winter said. I'm not a stupid little girl, I cried. I'm a very nice little girl. Go and stand in the corner, Mrs. Winter said. Then I got cross. I saw red, and I put the magic finger on Mrs. Winter good and strong. Almost at once. Guess what? Wonder what happened. Whiskers began growing out of her face. They were long, black whiskers, just like the ones you see on a cat, only much bigger. And how fast they grew! Before we had time to think, they were out to her ears. Ooh, imagine, here's a picture of her, Mrs. Winter, with whiskers coming out. Not a pretty sight. Of course, the whole class started screaming with laughter, and then Mrs. Winter said, "Will you be so kind as to tell me what you find so madly funny, all of you?" And when she turned to write something on the blackboard, we saw that she had grown a tail as well. A huge, bushy tail. Right there. Imagine that. Oh dear. Just because she told off a little girl. Yeah, not good at all, is it? Poor Mrs. Winter. Not good at all, no. Sweep doesn't like this part of the story. Doesn't like it. Scary to him. Oh. I cannot begin to tell you what happened after that, but if any of you are wondering whether Mrs. Winter is quite all right again now, the answer is no, and she never will be. Sure. The magic finger is something I've been able to do all my life. I can tell you just how I do it, because I don't even know myself. But it always happens when I get cross, when I see red. Then I get very, very hot all over. Then the tip of the forefinger of my right hand, this finger here, begins to tingle most terribly. And suddenly a sort of flash comes out of me. A quick flash, like something electric. It jumps out and touches the person who has made me cross, like that. You can see, there she is, the girl, pointing her finger, and this is electric current seems to come out. Ooh. Ghastly stuff. And after that, the magic finger is upon him or her, and things begin to happen. Well, the magic finger was now upon the whole of the Gregg family, and there was no taking it off again. I ran home and waited for things to happen. They happened fast. I shall now tell you what those things were. I got the whole story from Philip and William the next morning, after it was all over. In the afternoon of the very same day that I put the magic finger on the Gregg family, Mr. Gregg, Philip and William went out hunting once again. This time they were going after wild ducks, so they headed towards the lake. In the first hour they got 10 birds. In the next hour they got another 6. How many birds were there? 10 in the first hour, 6 in the second hour. 16 birds so far. "What a day!" cried Mr. Gregg. "This is the best yet." He was beside himself with joy. He managed to kill 16 birds. Just then 4 more wild ducks flew over their heads. 4 more. So you have 16 birds already who had died, and there are 4 more on their way. How many were there, Sweep? He's lost. He's lost counting. How many were there in total? Can you tell me? Just then 4 more wild ducks flew over their heads. They were flying very low. They were easy to hit. Bang, 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 bang went the guns, as you can see here. Shooting the guns. The ducks flew on. "We missed," said Mr. Gregg. "That's funny." Then to everyone's surprise, the 4 ducks turned round and came flying right back to the guns. "Hey," said Mr. Gregg, "what on earth are they doing?" "They're really asking for it this time." He shot at them again. So did the boys, and again they all missed. Mr. Gregg got very red in the face. "It's the light," he said. "It's getting too dark to see. Let's go home." So they started for home, carrying with them the 16 birds they had shot before, but the 4 ducks would not leave them alone. They now began flying around and around the hunters as they walked away. Mr. Gregg didn't like it one bit. "Be off," he cried, and he shot them many more times, but it was no good. He simply couldn't hit them. All the way home, those 4 ducks flew around in the sky above their heads, and nothing would make them go away. He was following the family all the way. Late that night, after Philip and William had gone to bed, Mr. Gregg went outside to get some wood for the fire. He was crossing the yard when all at once he heard the call of a wild duck in the sky. He stopped and looked up. The night was very still. There was a thin yellow moon over the trees on the hill, and the sky was filled with stars. Then Mr. Gregg heard the noise of wings flying low over his head, and he saw the 4 ducks, dark against the night sky, flying very close together. They were going around and round the house. Probably they'd been doing that all evening. Mr. Gregg forgot about the firewood and hurried back indoors. He was now quite afraid. He didn't like what was going on, but he said nothing about it to Mrs. Gregg. All he said was, "Come on, let's go to bed. I feel tired." So they went to bed and to sleep. When morning came, Mr. Gregg was the first to wake up. He opened his eyes. He was about to put out a hand for his watch to see the time, but his hand wouldn't come out. "That's funny," he said. "Where's my hand?" He lay still and wondering what was up. Maybe he had hurt that hand in some way. He tried the other hand. That wouldn't come out either. He sat up. Then for the first time he saw what he looked like. You wouldn't guess. Take a look at this picture. Over here. He's got wings! His hands have gone and he's got wings instead. He's become a man-bird. Birdman. Imagine that. He gave a yell and jumped out of bed. Mrs. Gregg woke up, and when she saw Mr. Gregg standing there on the floor, she gave a yell too, for he was now a tiny little man. He maybe was as tall as the seat of a chair, but no taller than that. And where his arms had been, he had a pair of duck's wings instead. Oh, must be the magic finger. Isn't that right, Sweep? Yes, it must be. Terrible, terrible. But, cried Mrs. Gregg, going purple in the face. "My dear man, what's happened to you?" "What's happened to both of us, you mean?" shouted Mr. Gregg. It was Mrs. Gregg's turn now to jump out of bed. She ran to look at herself in the glass, but she wasn't tall enough to see it. Take a look at that. She wanted to see herself in the mirror, but she couldn't reach it. Imagine that, how awful. She was even smaller than Mr. Greg, well, obviously, because she's shorter in height, right? And she too had got wings instead of arms. Oh, 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 sobbed Mrs. Greg. She was dreadfully upset. Understandable. This is witches' work, cried Mr. Greg, and both of them started running around the room, flapping their wings. You want to flap your wings, boys and girls over there? Flap your wings, flap your wings. Sleep, do you want to flap your wings? You're just waving. Go on, look at it now. A minute later, Philip and William burst in. The same thing had happened to them. They had wings and no arms. They were really tiny. They were about as big as robins. Mamma, 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 chirruped Philip. Look, Mamma, we can fly. And they flew up into the air. They were quite happy about it, actually, if you look at those boys' faces. They were quite happy about it. Very nice. Come down at once, said Mrs. Greg. You're much too high. But before she could say another word, Philip and William had flown right out the window. Oh, they were having fun. Mr. and Mrs. Greg ran to the window and looked out. The two tiny boys were now high up in the sky. Then Mrs. Greg said to Mr. Greg, Do you think we could do that, my dear? I don't see why not, Mr. Greg said. Come on, let's try. Mr. Greg began to flap his wings hard, and all at once, up he went. Then Mrs. Greg did the same. Help, she cried as she started going up. Save me. Come on, said Mr. Greg. Don't be afraid. So out the window they flew, far up into the sky, and it didn't take them long to catch up with Philip and William. Soon the whole family was flying around and around together. Oh, isn't it lovely, cried William. I've always wanted to know what it feels like a bird. Your wings are not getting tired, are they, dear? Mr. Greg asked Mrs. Greg. Not at all, Mrs. Greg said. I could go on forever. Hey, look down there, said Philip. Somebody's walking in our garden. Because, of course, they're so up above. Here are the Gregs. They're all up in the sky, having a gala time, as it might be. Wings. If we had wings, would you enjoy it? That's something to think about, isn't it? Write it in the comments. Kirukum lagbe if we had wings. I think it would be nice. Plain korchu lagbena. They all looked down, and there below them, in their own garden, they saw 4 enormous wild ducks. The ducks were as big as men, and what's more, they had great long arms like men, instead of wings. Here, have a look. The ducks. So the Gregs didn't have hands or arms anymore, they had wings, right? And the birds, the 4 ducks that were going round and round following them the night before, they had arms instead of wings. How interesting, right? The ducks were walking in a line to the door of the Greg's house, swinging their arms and holding their beaks high in the air. Stop, called the tiny Mr. Greg, flying down low over their heads. Go away, that's my house. The ducks looked up and quacked. The first one put out a hand, opened the door of the house, and went in. The others went in after him. The door shut. They did not have keys. How did they have keys? How did they open the door? The Gregs flew down and sat on the wall near the door. Mrs. Greg began to cry. Oh dear, she sobbed. They've taken our house. What shall we do? We have no place to go. Even the boys began to cry a bit now. We'll be eaten by cats and foxes in the night, said Philip. I want to sleep in my own bed, said William. Now then, said Mr. Greg, it isn't any good crying. That won't help us. Shall I tell you what we're going to do? What? They said. Mr. Greg looked at them and smiled. We're going to build a nest. A nest? They said. Can we do that? We must do it, said Mr. Greg. We've got to have somewhere to sleep. Follow me. Here they are, going to build a nest over there. They flew off to a tall tree, and right at the top of it, Mr. Greg chose the place for the nest. Now we want sticks, he said. Lots and lots of little sticks. Off you go, all of you. and find them and bring them back here." "But we have no hands," said Philip. "Then use your mouths." Mrs. Gregg and the children flew off. Soon they were back carrying sticks in their mouths. How bizarre. You have to see the picture. So these people have now become bird-like because they have no hands. So bizarre. Mr. Gregg took the sticks and started to build the nest. "More," he said. "I want more and more and more sticks. Keep going." The nest began to grow. Mr. Gregg was very good at making the sticks stick together. After a while, he said, "That's enough sticks. Now I want leaves and feathers and things like that to make the inside nice and soft." The building of the nest went on and on. It took a long time, but at last it was finished. "Try it," said Mr. Gregg, hopping back. He was very pleased with his work. "Oh, isn't it lovely?" said Mr. Gregg. Cried Mrs. Gregg, going into it and sitting down. "I feel I might lay an egg any moment." The others all got in beside her. "How warm it is," said William. "And what fun to be living so high up," said Philip. "We may be small, but nobody can hurt us up here." "What about food?" said Mrs. Gregg. "We haven't had a thing to eat all day." "That's right," Mr. Gregg said. "So we will now fly back to the house and go in by an open window and get the tin of biscuits when the ducks aren't looking." "Oh, we'll be pecked to bits by those dirty great ducks," cried Mrs. Gregg. "We shall be very careful, my love," said Mr. Gregg, and off they went. But when they got to the house, they found all the windows and doors closed. There was no way in. "Just look at that beastly duck cooking at my stove," cried Mrs. Gregg as she flew past the kitchen window. "How dare she?" "And look at that one holding my lovely gun," shouted Mr. Gregg. "One of them is lying in my bed," yelled William, looking into the top window. "And one of them is playing with my electric train," cried Philip. So the ducks have got into the Gregg's house. They're really enjoying it. One is cooking, one's playing with their toys, playing with the gun, doing whatnot. Complete role reversal, isn't it? Do you think that's right, though? It's worth thinking about, isn't it? Oh dear, cried Mrs. Gregg. "They've taken over our whole house. We shall never get it back. And what are we going to eat?" Because they couldn't get into the house. No food. "I will not eat worms," said Philip. "I'd rather die." "Or slugs," said William. Mrs. Gregg took the two boys under her wings and hugged them. "Don't worry," she said. "I can mince it all up very fine and you won't even know the difference. Lovely slug burgers, delicious worm burgers." Ugh. I don't know about you. I don't like the sound of those slug burgers and worm burgers. Do you, Sweep? No, you only like sausages. Yes. "Oh no," cried William. "Never," said Philip. "Disgusting," said Mr. Gregg. "Just because we have wings, we don't have to eat bird food." "Quite right. We shall eat apples instead. Our trees are full of them. Come on." So they flew off to an apple tree. Here we are, flying off to an apple tree. Over there, the apples. But to eat an apple without holding it in your hands is not at all easy. Every time you try to get your teeth into it, it just pushes away. In the end, they were able to get a few small bites each, and then it began to get dark. So they all flew back to the nest and lay down to sleep. It must have been about this time that I, back in my own house, so this is the girl coming back in, she's narrating now, picked up the telephone and tried to call Philip. I wanted to see if the family was all right. "Hello," I said. "Quack," said a voice at the other end. "Who is it?" I asked. "Quack, quack." "Philip," I said, "is that you? Quack, 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 quack." "Oh, stop it," I said. Then there came a very funny noise. It was like a bird laughing. Well, it is laughable. Look, this duck is on the telephone. I put the telephone down quickly. "Oh, that magic finger," I cried. "What has it done to my friends?" That night, while Mr. and Mrs. Gregg, Philip and William were trying to get some sleep up in the high nest, a great wind began to blow. The tree rocked from side to side, and everyone, even Mr. Gregg, was afraid that the nest would fall down. Then came the rain. It rained and rained, and the water ran into the nest, and they all got as wet as could be. Oh, it was a bad, bad night. Oh dear, it's not good. At last the morning came, and with it the warm sun. Well, said Mrs. Gregg, thank goodness that's over. I never want to sleep in a nest again. She's got up and looked over on the side. Help, she cried. Look down there. What is it, my love? Said Mr. Gregg. He stood up and peeped over the side. He got the surprise of his life. On the ground below them stood the 4 enormous ducks, as tall as men, and 3 of them were holding guns in their hands. One had Mr. Gregg's gun, one had Philip's gun, one had William's gun. The guns were all pointing right up at the nest, like that, over there. Do you think the ducks will shoot them? What will happen next? No, 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 called out Mr. and Mrs. Gregg, both together. Don't shoot, please don't shoot. Why not? Said one of the ducks. It was the one who wasn't holding a gun. You're always shooting at us. Oh, but that's not the same, said Mr. Gregg. We are allowed to shoot ducks. Who allows you? Asked the duck. We allow each other, said Mr. Gregg. Very nice, said the duck. Now we are going to allow each other to shoot you. Fair enough, right? I would have loved to see Mr. Gregg's face just then, says the girl. Oh, please, cried Mrs. Gregg. My 2 little children are up here with us. You wouldn't shoot my children. Yesterday you shot my children, said the duck. You shot all 6 of my children. So those 6 birds that we counted in the 2nd hour, those belong to this duck family. It's very sad, isn't it? I'll never do it again, cried Mr. Gregg. Never, never, never. Do you really mean that? Asked the duck. I do mean it, said Mr. Gregg. I'll never shoot another duck as long as I live. That's not good enough, said the duck. What about deer? I'll do anything you say, if you will only put down those guns, cried Mr. Gregg. I'll never shoot another duck or another deer or anything else again. Will you give me your word on that? Said the duck. I will, said Mr. Gregg. Will you throw away your guns? Asked the duck. I will break them into tiny bits, said Mr. Gregg, and never again need you be afraid of me or my family. Very well, said the duck. You may now come down. And by the way, may I congratulate you on the nest? For a first effort, it's pretty good. What a relief. Phew! Isn't that right, Sweep? Yes. Mr. and Mrs. Gregg and Philip and William hopped out of the nest and flew down. Then all at once, everything went black before their eyes. They couldn't see. At the same time, a funny feeling came over them all, and they heard a great wind blowing in their ears. Then the black that was before their eyes turned to blue, to green, to red, and then to gold, and suddenly there they were, standing in lovely bright sunshine in their own garden, near their own house, and everything was back to normal once again. And they've all got their hands back, their arms and hands back. There, see? Isn't that nice? Our wings have gone, cried Mr. Gregg, and our arms have come back, and we're not tiny any more, laughed Mrs. Gregg. Oh, I'm so glad. Philip and William began dancing about with joy. Then high above their heads they heard the call of a wild duck. They all looked up, and they saw the 4 birds, lovely against the blue sky, flying very close together, heading back to the lake in the woods. It must have been about half an hour later that I myself walked into the Greggs' garden. I'd come to see how things were going, and I must admit I was expecting the worst. At the gate, I stopped and stared. It was a queer sight. You can see here's a picture of them in the garden and the ducks flying away. Just nice. In one corner, Mr. Gregg was smashing all 3 guns into tiny pieces with a huge hammer. In another corner, Mrs. Gregg was placing beautiful flowers upon 16 tiny mounds of soil, which I learned later were the graves of the ducks that had been shot the day before. Ah, so that's nice. Here we go. Here's Mrs. Gregg laying down flowers of 16 graves, those 16 ducks who had died the day before. That's nice. They are really sorry about what they've done. In the middle of the yard stood Philip and William with a sack of their father's best barley beside them. They were surrounded by ducks, doves, pigeons, sparrows, robins, larks, and many other kinds that I didn't know, and the birds were eating the barley that the boys were scattering by the handful. "Good morning, Mr. Gregg," I said. Mr. Gregg lowered his hammer and looked at me. "My name isn't Gregg anymore," he said. "In honour of my feathered friends, I have changed it from Gregg to Egg." "And I am Mrs. Egg," said Mrs. Gregg. "What happened?" I asked. They seemed to have completely gone dotty. All 4 of them. Gregg to Egg. Philip and William then began to tell me the whole story. When they'd finished, William said, "Look, there's the nest. Can you see it? Right up in the top of the tree. That's where we slept last night." So here he is pointing at the nest at the top, telling the girl. "I built it all myself," said Mr. Egg proudly. "Every stick of it." Quite proud moment. "If you don't believe us," Mrs. Egg said, "just go into the house and take a look at the bathroom. It's a mess." "They filled the tub right up to the brim," Philip said. "They must have been swimming around in it all night, and feathers everywhere." "Ducks like water," Mr. Egg said. "I'm glad they had a good time." Just then, from somewhere over by the lake, there came a loud bang. "Someone's shooting," I cried. "That'll be Jim Cooper," Mr. Egg said. "Him and his 3 boys. They're shooting mad, those Coopers are, the whole family." Suddenly, I started to see red. Uh-oh. Not a good moment, is it? No, not a good moment. I got very hot all over. Then the tip of my finger began tingling most terribly. I could feel the power building up and up inside me. I turned and started running towards the lake as fast as I could. "Hey," shouted Mr. Egg. "What's up? Where are you going?" "To find the Coopers," I called back. "But why?" "You wait and see," I said. "They'll be nesting in the trees tonight. Every one of them." Off she goes, running towards with the magic finger and electric current. And there she goes. The end. Here we are. That's the story. We finished it. Right? What did you think of it? It's a nice story, isn't it? Lots to learn about. For one thing, there's a question about hunting. Then there's a question of forgiveness, an apology, accepting doing wrong. And then there's also a question of, as you sow, so you shall reap, cause and effect, karma, for those of us Indians, So lots to think about there. What are your thoughts about the story? What did you think? What have you learnt from it? Let me know in the comments. This live video will end in a minute, but I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, all of you who've been on. Thank you for keeping me company. Hope you enjoyed it. And you can catch up again in the group later on with this if you want to refresh. কেমন লাগলো আমাকে জানাবেন। ভালো লাগলে আর একটাও করতে পারি। যদি কোনো রিকোয়েস্ট থাকে কোনো পার্টিকুলার ছোট গল্প, প্লিজ লেট মি নো। সুইপ আসবে, নাহলে অন্য কেউ আসবে, আমার কালেকশন আছে। They want to come, they will join us. Thanks very much everyone. আজকে চলি, ভালো থাকবেন, সাবধানে থাকবেন, আবার দেখা হবে। নমস্কার, বাই বলো। বাই বলো, বাই বাই, বাই এভরিওয়ান, বাই।